Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Kortni Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 90. I'm Dr. Kortni Alston. I am so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for listening. See, I recently had a conversation with a friend, and this topic came up that I want to talk about today. And that's enough. Being enough. And it's interesting to say this because sometimes we could just had enough with enough. Have you ever been there before? It wasn't just that one conversation. You know, this has been a topic with many different conversations with different individuals. And something that I also, as a human being, feel that I have been a work in progress in as relates to this area. Even when I facilitate training sessions, I often get asked by teams about coping with imposter syndrome. And you may also relate to this. You may find yourself doing more just to be enough. Have you ever done that before? Or even afraid to do anything because you feel you aren't good enough? Well, I'm here to say you are enough. You are enough. And you're not alone in regards to feeling this way. And I say that because I found an empowering article found in Psychology Today, another favorite place of mine. And the article is appropriately titled, You Are Enough. You Are Enough. And is written by Dr. Alexis Conison. And she talks about different dynamics as it relates to being enough. I love this article because Alexis really gives a lot of great information in regards to us really processing enough. And I also really value how she wrote the article. And so, again, Dr. Alexis Conison. And so let's talk more about what Dr. Alexis Conison had to share. One of the things that she mentioned is she shares some statistics. And one of them is she says that 91% of women are dissatisfied with their bodies, our bodies. The average dieter goes on 4 to 5 diets. And she also talks about this other dynamic in terms of research. She discussed that during the pandemic, that 40% of people said that it would be worse to gain 25 pounds during quarantine, I should say, than to be infected with COVID. Rather, the individuals feel it would be worse to gain 25 pounds during quarantine than to become infected with COVID. So I really treasure that she talks about this in terms of being enough by having us look at dieting our bodies, right? Weight. Dr. Conison reminds us that none of this works in terms of all the statistics that we just heard. She says, and I'm going to quote her because it's really powerful. She says, and I quote, "Hating ourselves doesn't lead to change. It just keeps us caught in toxic cycles of dieting, obsessing about food, feeling out of control and feeling shameful, end quote. Does that resonate with you? I thought it was a really powerful quote. And I'm going to mention another quote or two from Dr. Conison. This is really a powerful article that, of course, you can read in its entirety on the podcast page of this episode, which is at drcourtneyalston.com/podcast/episode 90. Now, she encourages us to focus on mindfulness, in particular, a subject we talk about often on the Courting Happiness podcast, and that self-compassion is one of our favorite topics here. And we talk often about Dr. Christian Neff, which she actually cites in her article, which made me just so in awe of the piece even more, because I am a person that really values the work of Dr. Christian Neff. So much so that even in the Courting Happiness studio, her book, Fierce Self-Compassion, is never too far away from me. So self-compassion, as Dr. Alexis mentions, is that she says self-compassion is an intentional practice that changes the way we relate to ourselves and those around us. Another thing I really value that she shares is this, and I'm going to quote her again. And here is a really positive quote that I hope really you think about and allow it to sit with you for a moment as well when it comes down to really the empowerment and the power of self-compassion. So she says, and I quote, self-compassion is the antidote to shame that our culture instills in us. When we can embrace the truth that we are good enough, that we're not broken, that we are not a problem to be fixed, then everything starts to shift. We see more clearly the world around us. Wow, I thought this was so powerful in regards to thinking about the value of self-compassion, right? In terms of looking at it, in terms of looking at shame, which made me also think about the great work being done by Dr. Brene Brown, who's, an incredible scholar and public intellectual, and really, an empowering person in regards to us understanding the level of and the power of vulnerability, empathy, and also shame. And Dr. Brown always mentions, if you want to take the shame out of something, you talk about it. And what I love so much about what Dr. Conison is saying is that self-compassion, right, in terms of thinking about it in terms of shame, what can help us as relates to shame is self-compassion and having a culture of that. I also love that she talks about we can embrace the truth that we are good enough. We are good enough, that we are not broken, that we are not a problem to be fixed, then everything starts to shift. And she says, we start seeing more clearly the world around us. I always love to share with individuals, it starts with self, right? How we treat ourselves, how we see ourselves. And then that level of self-compassion, what I love so much, I feel like it's a ripple effect in terms of being able to be and spread compassion on a global scale. It could be on, in your home, right? It could be in your neighborhood, to your community, wherever you are. And I love that she talks about really the power. I feel it's such a power in terms of a self-compassion. She also ends the article in a full circle dynamic by going back to talking about weight and diets. She adds this, that our problem has never been your body. She says, the problem has never been your body. The problem is our culture, and that is what we need to work to change. She also says this, you are enough. And asks this question of all of us, can you see it now? Think about that question. Can you see it now? I hope so. I hope you see it. I hope that you see that you are enough. And I also want to have you think about this too. If you're someone right now who's saying, you know what, hey, Dr. Kortni, I don't feel enough. This is really speaking to me. And maybe you might be thinking about there's something that you want to do, but you're holding yourself back because you don't feel that you're good enough. Go for it. You may have an idea out there. You don't feel like you're good enough. Go for it. You may want to share a message, but you don't feel like you're good enough. Go for it. Because you are good enough. You are good enough. And if you still are dealing with that inner voice that's talking about you aren't good enough, be kind to yourself. Speak kindly to yourself. And as Dr. Niff says, and I love her work in terms of self-compassion, she says in her self-compassion activity, she shares this, and it's so profound in terms of really taking an active effort to soften the self-critical voice. But she says, do so with compassion rather than self-judgment. Say something like, I know you're worried about me and feel unsafe, but you are causing me unnecessary pain. Could you let my inner compassionate self say a few words now? I love how she is, again, softening that, self-critical voice that can be really hard on us, right? But she says, I know you're worried about me and feel unsafe, but you're causing me unnecessary pain. Could you let my inner compassionate self say a few words now? I love that. I love that. I love how it's opposed to, just going really, hard and strong in terms of being, so rough. She says, make an active effort to soften the self-critical voice. In other words, practice compassion rather than self-judgment. And I think, again, that is such the beauty of self-compassion and compassion. So as I mentioned earlier, there's something that you feel is holding you back. Practice self-compassion. If you have an idea, practice self-compassion. If you want to share a message, but you're holding on to it, practice self-compassion. Practice self-compassion every step of the way. And remember this, you are enough. I hope you feel a level of belonging listening to this podcast, because I am always, always cheering you on. You can read the article that was published in Psychology Today and the self-compassion activity created by Dr. Christian Neff by visiting the episode page of this podcast at drkortnialston.com/podcast/episode 90. That's Dr. Kortni Alston. So drkortnialston.com/podcast/episode 90. Thank you so much for listening. Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drkortnialston.com. That's podcast@drkortnialston.com. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Courting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.